Hey everybody, Grey Duck Customs here. We are going to do a step-by-step walkthrough on making a carbon fiber front mask for a Honda Ruckus scooter. So, this is what our mold looks like. We'll go through the mold setup in another video. That's for a different day. But today we're going to go through the supplies you're going to need to get set up, and then the process: waxing, in-mold clear coating, carbon fiber layup, vacuum bag setup, and then obviously the infusion. And then hopefully we get a good part out of that, pop it out, and it looks like $1 million. To start out, we're going to use our wax. This is made by TR. It's mold release compound. This stuff works fantastic. I've been using it for many, many years. I always tape off the perimeter of my mold flange because this is where our vacuum bag tape is going to go. So you don't want to put wax on that. You want to keep that as raw as you possibly can. Once we're waxed up here, we're going to switch over to a Duratec clear marine gel coat combination for our in-mold clear coat. This is going to give us something where when it pops out, you can sand it, finish it really, really nice, take care of any imperfections if there are any, without wrecking the carbon fiber. For our infusion process, we're going to use the Premium Resin Tech RDR 3400 epoxy system along with the appropriate catalyst. You will need an HVLP gun to spray your in-mold clear coat. This is available from thegelcoater.com. They're based out of Canada. By far the best HVLP gun I've used for composite stuff. Shout out those guys. They do a fantastic job on their spray guns. We're going to get right to it. First step, wax our mold. With this type of wax, you want to use small circles. I don't buff the flange area. I leave the wax on there. And that's intentional because it helps you pop the part down the road. So keep that in mind when you're doing your prep. Small circles. You want to make sure you get into all the nice little tight areas. This is a fairly small part to do, so it's going to be a relatively easy setup. I've run a lot of these over the years, so hopefully this goes good for you guys. Hopefully it makes for an interesting video. And I hope you guys learned something. That's what we're about here at Grey Duck Customs. We're about education. We're about making really nice, high quality parts. And obviously we're about supporting the products that we use as well. The companies that I've used for all these years have done a very good job in helping me get to the stage I'm at. This is not something you're going to learn overnight. It's something that you're going to take at least a few tries before you get it right. But don't be discouraged. Don't be scared. Everyone can do the same thing. So with this TR wax, you do not need to let it sit that long before you actually wipe it off. You want to let it just sit for a minute or so. It'll start to haze up just a little bit. Got ourselves a fresh rag. You want to make sure that these are nice and clean so you don't scratch your mold surface. And same kind of thing. We're just going to use circles. And we're going to get all that wax compound off in the mold cavity that we're actually going to do our layups on. We are not concerned about the mold flange, like I said before. We're only concerned about the part cavity. I'm going to flip this around here so I can see what I'm doing a little bit better on this side. If you do let the wax sit on too long, you can still get it off. It just takes a lot more elbow grease. So try not to do that. If you can help it, try to not get yourself into a pickle where you're not able to get your mold release wax off. There we go, stage one. The mold is waxed. We're going to let that sit for a little bit, and then we'll come back and we'll do our in-mold clear coating. I'll show you kind of the gun setup, and then we'll get right to it. All right, we've got our Duratec 904-070 Sunshield Clear and Clear Gel Coat blend. We've got the appropriate amount of catalyst that goes with that. And we've got our Gel Coater HVLP. I like to keep the air pressure a little bit higher than what some people would like it, typically around 25 PSI. I do throttle the needle so it doesn't pull back all the way. And I also keep the fan fairly tight. I give it about a quarter turn out from all the way in. I find that helps get the gel coat on a little bit thicker and provides a very, very, very nice surface coat. So we're gonna go time lapse here. I'm gonna try to do it first person for you guys so you can kind of see what I'm seeing, and then let's rock and roll. All right, we've got our inmold clear coating set to rock and roll, ready for the carbon fiber. For this application, we're using 2 different layers of carbon. The first one is a 6K twill weave. The second one is going to be a 3K plain weave. This is going to help make a really nice rigid reinforcement, and hopefully again, it's going to look like $1,000,000. So this mold surface is pretty tack free right now. Typically when I'm laying carbon fiber, I like to have a little bit of tack, and so to help out with that, we're using a composite-based spray tack. This is not a standard, big box department store spray tack. This is composite specific, and it is designed for composites. So be careful when you're using spray tacks. Make sure you get the right stuff. To do this, we are going to put a very, very, very light tack of spray adhesive on the carbon fiber itself. And by very light, I mean we are going to basically give it a quick dusting just to help adhesion. We're not trying to go crazy on that. We want to make sure that our carbon fiber is aligned as best as we can get it. Verticals up and down, all that kind of fun stuff. And we are going to start by pushing in the center first and then kind of work our way around the perimeter after the fact. So we're going to go to our deepest spot and kind of lock that in. And again, here you want to be fairly cautious with how much pressure you're putting on. You want to try to keep the fabric as smooth as you possibly can. Wrinkle-free, distortion-free, all that kind of fun stuff. Make the cosmetics as beautiful as you can get them. The fabric will move around a little bit, so you want to kind of work with the direction of the fabric to the best of your ability on the part that you're making. Every part's going to be a little different. This one is not super complicated, doesn't have any tight radiuses or anything like that. So, and again, you want to keep verifying that your fabric is in good relation to staying nice and smooth, staying nice and straight. And you want to be a little bit patient here. You don't want to try to rush this step. You can only do your cosmetic layer once, and if you are in a rush, there's a potential that you could screw up the weave direction, or worse, not get it down into all the tight corners like it needs to be tight against the mold surface. And we are just using standard finger pressure on this, nothing crazy. And again, slowly working our way from the center out. Very, very light finger pressure. And I will mention while we're talking about that, this is something that you want to wear gloves for. The last thing that you want to do is induce oils from your fingers and hands. So I've seen guys do laminations before where they're making parts right after lunch and they've got, French fry grease or burger grease on their fingers, and you'll be able to see that in your parts. So wear gloves. Wear gloves. Gloves are cheap. Parts are expensive. It's my pro tip of the day. And again, we're working from the center out, just kind of making sure that the carbon is nice and tight against that mold surface. Working our way around carefully, trying to make that weave look as pretty as it can possibly look. It takes a little practice to make sure that your carbon looks cosmetically perfect. So don't be discouraged if you're trying this for the first time and you're kind of messing up the fabric. That does happen. It'll take a few tries before you learn how each part wants to react in the mold. And every part is a little different, so you gotta plan accordingly for that. This one's going down really, really nice though. Like I said, it's not a very complicated part, but you still want to give it your utmost attention and try to do your best job on everything that you're doing. Every step along the way is an important step when it comes to the resin infusion. Really want to make sure that you get that fabric pressed nice and tight. Make sure that you don't have any air gaps between the carbon fiber and the mold surface. This is where the artistry comes in when it comes to composites. If you're making race grade parts, this doesn't really matter. You can just lay the carbon fiber in and call it good to go, but when you're doing cosmetic parts, you really, really, really want to make sure that the carbon fiber looks as pretty as it can possibly look. Okay, that's fantastic. That looks really good. So what I'll do now is I'll use a little bit of spray tack, come around the outside perimeter, and just do a very, very light hit. This is going to help lock that fabric in place. You don't need to overdo it with the spray adhesive. That'll take a second to go. So what I'm going to do from here, I'm going to do a little bit of pre-trimming before I stick this down. Typically you'll use a nice pair of scissors. You can also use an electric scissors if that's more convenient for you. In this particular application, we are going to have the resin flow across the part. So on this side, we are going to have fabric go all the way out to the outside. And on this side, we're going to trim that a little bit short. So it's just coming outside the part cavity. And what we're going to do here is leave a little channel for our vacuum manifold. And I'll show you that on the next step. Same thing with our top here. We can bring this down basically right on the edge there, just outside the part cavity. There's no need for that to go any further. just like so. And at this point, you can start pushing this down if you want to, once you get that locked in. And then same thing with our bottom side here. All right, our first layer is good to go. If you've got any questions, now is the time to double check all your work. Make sure it's all down nice and tight. Make sure there's no gaps again. And now this stage, we're gonna put our second layer in. Again, this is a 3K plane weave. And this one, we are gonna use a little bit of spray tack on the back side of the carbon to help set it. And again, you don't need a lot, so don't overdo it. I have seen some shops go just insane with the amount of spray tack that they put on their products, and it boggles my mind. And same application applies. You want to start in the center. Work your way out. The plain weave does not conform quite as good as the twill weave does, so you may need to put a slice in it here and there to kind of help it lay down like you want it to lay down, and that's okay because it's on the back side. You'll never see that slice. The most important part again is making sure that you have no voids between the layers. Take your time, work around. Manipulate the fabric any way you need to get it manipulated. Make sure you're pushed down. You do not want any gaps. You want to make sure your carbon fiber is directly on top of the layer behind it. If you do need to use a little bit more spray tack, feel free to come back and use it as needed, but use it sparingly. Again, you don't need a lot of spray tack. It does a very, very good job holding the fabric exactly where you want it with very, very little amounts. This is looking fantastic so far. And again, with this particular shape, I'm able to just use my fingers to do the work in the mold. Sometimes if you've got a complicated shape or something with a lot of tight right angle corners, you might need to use a roller tool, something similar to like a window roller, to really get that carbon nice and tight into the corners. But this one's a fairly low radius, simple shape to set up for. Just like so. And again, we're going to come back and we're going to do the spray tack around the perimeter. We'll lock that in. And again, on this side, we do not need a lot of overhang, so we're going to trim that right now. And on this side, we can just leave it. We can leave it long, no big deal. This is going to be our feed side for our resin infusion, so that is just fine to be as long as it is. We'll take that corner off real quick there. And we'll take this corner off real quick here. There we go, just like so. All right, there you go. We have ourselves a setup for the flow media, the PO ply, all our vacuum infusion supplies coming up next. Looks pretty good so far. All right, our next stage is going to be the flow media and the PO ply. This is a coated PO ply, so it releases very, very, very easily compared to the non-coated PO ply. It's a little trick of the trade. So we're going to do the really nice once over on the spray adhesive. We're going to set that aside for just a minute. We're going to do the same thing on the back of our part here. Get a few little stragglers out from the trimming of the flow media. Otherwise, they just get left in the infusion. And with the PO ply, we're not super concerned about the finish quality as long as it's fairly smooth. We don't want it to be super, super bad, but you want to do the best job you can, like all the steps obviously, but with this stuff, it's designed to come off the back of the part, so you might get a few little wrinkles from where you did your folding and your pleating, but aside from that, it's extremely thin. So if you do have any wrinkles that you want to get rid of after the fact, you can just hit it with a little bit of sandpaper and you'll be good to go. This stuff does not stretch very good, so that's one of the reasons why you need to fold it and pleat it into place. It is a very non-conformable fabric compared to some other stuff out there. Compared to your carbon fiber, which does have a little bit of movement in it, this is a lot different. We want to get 100% coverage around the carbon fiber, and then we'll go a little bit further past that for a trim line here. Add just a little bit more glue here. Want to make sure the PO ply is nice and stuck. You can also use masking tape if you want to do masking tape as well, but I find that gluing down the PO ply is the ticket. Another trick of the trade, this stuff does not cut very good with scissors, so you do want to use your electric shears on this particular part. You'll be much happier. Set that in place like so. We'll set that in place like so. And we will set that in place like so. There we go. So I've talked about this before. This is going to be our feed side. This is going to be our vacuum side. So So what we're going to want to do is leave the peel ply long to actually connect to the vacuum manifold. What will end up happening during the infusion is the resin will run across the part and it will end up stopping at the carbon fiber and have a really difficult time going through the peel ply. Hopefully we don't suck up a lot of resin into our vacuum manifold. We do have a catch pot for that in case that does happen, but we try not to do that. And here's our flow media. You can kind of see through it. It's like a mesh, just a plastic mesh. And we're going to do the same thing with this as we do with the peel ply. We're going to coat this in glue. You can use a pretty liberal amount on the flow media to help it stick a little bit better. Now this, we are already pre-trimmed. And the reason why I pre-trimmed it is so it's easier to set in place. And I'll show you what's going on here. We're going to try to short the flow media just a little bit. A lot of people misunderstand resin infusions and they think that there's actually a pulling force from the vacuum, and that's not really the case. It's more of a pressure differential from the part being under vacuum to the resin cup, which is not under vacuum. And so it's actually a hydraulic motion of the pressure in the atmosphere is pushing down on the resin cup, forcing the resin through the part and trying to fill that negative cavity space, negative pressure cavity space. So don't get it confused. Science is science, and we're doing some science here. So there we go. So we're just a little bit short on the vacuum manifold side. What that's going to do is when the resin comes across here, it's going to flow from the important side. It's going to push its way all the way across here, and then it's going to kind of fight its way through that carbon fiber very slowly compared to how it moves across the rest of the part. And that's a completely normal operation. Depending on the size of your part, you may have to add extra feed channels depending on how big your part is. And you may want to use a different flow media, something that might be a little faster, a little bit slower. There's so many variables in the resin infusion that it really takes a few tries of dialing it in before you really know what you're doing. There we go. And the feed side here, we're going to leave that long because that's where our feed manifold is going to go. And I'm going to trim this. Trim this flush with the bottom of our part cavity here. This stuff does not cut with an electric shears, so you're going to need a heavy duty pair of scissors to cut this stuff. Okay, there we go. We have our peel ply and our flow media down. Next step is to set up our vacuum manifold and our feed lines. All right, we got our peel ply, our flow media down. We're going to set up for a resin feed line and a vacuum manifold line. For the resin feed line, we have spiral wrap, and then this is covered in a peel ply. So when the vacuum bag gets sucked down on top of it, it doesn't actually go in between the little spirals. That can potentially cause a vacuum bag leak, which you do not want to have. On the vacuum manifold side, this is what's called a membrane fabric. So it's got spiral wrap, and then it's also got this fancy sleeving around it that allows air to pass through, but not resin. So if the resin actually gets to the point of hitting this, the resin won't go into our catch pot. As just a secondary backup, we have a piece of Soric, which is a core material, and this will get glued down just underneath our vacuum manifold. All right, We got our intake side. We've got our vacuum side all set to rock and roll. Last step is to finish the vacuum bag. Some people like to take the vacuum tape and run it around the perimeter of their part. I prefer to personally put the vacuum tape on the bag and then do all my pleat work once we're assembling. It's kind of 6-1, half a dozen the other. There are no wrong ways or right ways. As long as you've got a good vacuum bag seal and you don't have any leaks, that is the most important part. So again, if you're going to be doing this, maybe you want to try it each way and see which one you prefer. I have just found that for me personally, it works a little bit better doing it this way. Give that a nice squeeze. Make sure the tape is nice and tight against the vacuum bag. And now you see the yellow tape I have around the perimeter here. We've been protecting that edge seal since the beginning. No spray adhesive, nothing like that's going on it. So now that we're all set to rock and roll for the vacuum bag, we can remove that yellow tape and start putting our corners down and get this vacuum bag going. There are a number of different vacuum bag setups on the market. Each one is a little bit specific depending on what type of resin you're using. The epoxy is the easiest to use when it comes to resin systems. It does not eat vacuum bags. It does not have a problem. If you do use a polyester or vinyl ester resin system, fair warning, there are certain vacuum bags that do not like polyester and vinyl ester systems, and they will actually eat the bag during your infusion, which is terrible. If you don't know that and you're not prepared for it, you're going to be in a world for hurt because the resin's going to start going through there, and all you're going to have is problems. Your part is probably not going to work out very good afterwards. So again, I like to start in the corners when I'm doing my vacuum bagging. And then from there, we want to make sure we have a little extra room for where the resin feed side is, and then also the vacuum manifold side is. So I will come through and give a couple quick little pleats. You can see the vacuum bag is more than big enough right now. So I will add a couple quick little pleats here. And the pleats give you a little extra room when you're doing your infusion stuff. This particular part is not super complicated, so the pleat work doesn't have to be insane like some parts are. The most important part of doing your vacuum bag is just making sure that you have no pressure in any of the areas that might potentially cause a bag to leak. So your corners are especially important. The areas where you're dipping down into the part cavity are important. You want to have a lot of extra bag there so it has somewhere to actually tighten down into once you're getting going. And again, everybody has a little bit different method of what they're most comfortable with for their vacuum bagging and their setup. Like I said, this particular part I've run a number of times, so I'm pretty comfortable with the operation at this stage. You want to be careful that you don't accidentally get any sort of contaminants underneath your gum tape. You can exercise patience here. You're not in a rush to do it. The most important part is getting yourself a nice seal on your bag. And giving ourselves a little bit of room to play around with here. Got to pinch those corners nice and tight. One of the most common areas where vacuum bags will fail is where your pleating is, so be careful there. Again, we'll kind of work from side to side here, end up in the middle. And again, everybody's got a different method of doing this. I've seen it done so many different ways that this is just my way. All right. Our vacuum bag is nice and loose. You can see there's plenty of extra room all over for manipulation once we get going on the infusion here. So I'm going to clamp the line off, pull a vacuum, and then let's rock and roll. All right, it's going to get a little loud in here, so I apologize for that. But we have a resin feed line here and our cup here. I got a little stand that the resin cup is going to sit on. I always try to keep the resin cup below the part level. There's a little bit more pressure on the infusion doing that. And then here's our vacuum source. So we're going to give this a nice kink, like so. We're going to give it a little bit of a tape job here. And then let's pull a vacuum. This will take a few seconds to start to kind of pull down a little bit. And when you're doing that, you want to make sure that you're manipulating the bag to take all the pressure off of all the corners and off the pleats. And very, very important. There's no pressure on any of the corners anywhere. See, it's starting to pull down a little bit now. You want to make sure that the vacuum bag is tucked into all the tight areas of the mold. And again, no tight corners. You don't want there to be stretching on the vacuum bag. You want it to kind of fold and pleat into place, so to speak. And then once you're pretty happy with how it looks, you want to start going around the perimeter and really pushing down pretty hard. And you will start to hear a whistle if there's a bag leak. Right now we're sitting at about 15 inches of vacuum, and as I push down on these pleats and as I push down on the gum tape, we'll get that bag more and more and more sealed. And you want to continually go through and make sure those pleats are nice and tight. Very, very, very critical. And again, you want to run around, just make sure that the bag isn't tight anywhere, it's not stretching, there's no marks anywhere where it looks like it's under any sort of pressure. You really want to make sure you got a nice bag with no stretching. And I can hear a vacuum leak right now, which is a good thing. And again, you want to make sure that your bag is not stretched anywhere, it's not tight anywhere. There we go. Now we're getting sealed. Still going on the perimeter there, squeezing all the pleats, making sure everything's nice and sealed. Our vacuum gauge is now at about 25 inches, so we're getting pretty down there. The goal is to try to get a 28.5 on the vacuum. Obviously, the bigger the part, the longer it will take to evacuate all your air and get a full vacuum. Some people will use a fancy gauge to check their vacuum level. I don't, I haven't needed it yet. But the technology is out there if you want to spend the money. It just costs more money to do. And again, just keep going around that seal, make sure that you don't have any leaks. We're getting down there to about 28 inches right now, so this is a very, very strong vacuum. Looking fantastic. Nice and tight. No pinch corners. Looks pretty darn good right now, and we're sitting almost at 28.5. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shut the vacuum off. I'm going to let this sit for about a half an hour to make sure there's no drop. That's one very, very crucial thing, is doing a drop-down test on your part. If you don't do a drop-down test and you were to shoot the infusion right away, you might have a pinhole leak and you won't know it until you start running resin through it. So it's very, very crucial at this stage. Stop what you're doing, let it sit for half an hour, watch that vacuum gauge, make sure it doesn't drop, make sure you don't lose vacuum. And if you do, you can come back and make an adjustment. Obviously, if there is no drop, you run your resin infusion and you're off to the races. So rock and roll. All right, we've waited half an hour. We've got absolutely no movement on the vacuum gauge. We're still sitting rock solid at 28.5 inches. As you can see, the vacuum bag is still looking good. I've got some epoxy resin with the appropriate hardener mixed up. This is about a 45-minute epoxy hardener system in terms of open life. And we don't need anywhere near that amount of time because of the size of the part. So we're gonna mix this very, very, very thoroughly. With epoxy, you wanna mix it and mix it and mix it and mix it. You wanna make sure that you scrape the walls really, really well. If you wanna transfer it into a second cup, you can. A lot of people will do that just to make sure that there's no residue sitting on the sidewalls of non-mixed epoxy. It's a little bit more temperamental than a polyester or vinyl ester system. So just make sure you mix really, 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 really well. We'll do this for probably about 5 to 10 minutes. Just because, again, I have got 45 minutes of work time on this epoxy. If you do have a vacuum chamber that you want to use for degassing, once you get this mixed, that would be a good time to degas it. We're not going to do that on this particular resin system because it's got very, very excellent air release. So it doesn't have a lot of bubbles in it by the time we're actually going to run the part. But I'm going to keep mixing, and I will catch up with you guys once we're ready to start running the part. And I'll probably do that on time lapse just to make it a little easier for you guys to watch. You guys don't need to see the whole thing. You'll be able to get the drift on time lapse. So rock and roll. All right, our resin's been mixed for a little while now. We're ready to shoot this infusion. One thing that I try to do is I will elevate the vacuum manifold. You can hear the vacuum pump is running in the background. I apologize about that. We'll go to quiet pump one of these days, but for right now, this works fantastic. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna snip the little corner off of there. We're gonna cut the tape. We're gonna drop this in the feed line, and you guys should be able to see the resin cruising across the part. We're just gonna do this real time because I don't think it's gonna take that long. If we need to time lapse it down the road, we'll have the video editor do it, right? So we're gonna snip our feed line there. We're gonna snip our tape. Some guys like to use clamps for this. I'm not fancy enough for all that kind of fun jazz. And you want to be pretty careful with trying to get this set up so that you're not accidentally pulling air into the system when you put it into the cup here. And we are off to the races. There we go. You can see the dark areas starting the infusion process. Like I said, this is going to move across pretty quick, so I figured we can just do this real time. As a matter of fact, let me lift up our camera view here, show you guys a more up close and personal view of what's going on here. You can see the resin flow front moving across the part. You can see the areas of the extra carbon outside the flow mesh. Those are slowly getting saturated. It's looking pretty textbook so far. Like I said, this is going to go pretty quick. It's not a very big part, so. This is a fairly low viscosity resin. So it cruises across very, very, very nicely. And again, you can see this area on the outside of the flow mesh. That resin's starting to get pushed into the fabric a little bit on both sides. And so what's happening here is the resin is actually trying to equalize the pressure from the environment to our low pressure zone here in the resin cavity. And pretty soon all of this perimeter around here will be saturated. That resin will bleed all the way out to every bit of exposed carbon. It might even go off into that peel ply. But you're going to start to see it's going to be hitting the end of the flow media here. And it will go significantly slower now that it's done that. It's going to end up basically going up and into that final tail end here. And at some point, you're going to need to clamp the line if you don't want to overfill your part. So pay attention to that. You can see that in our cup, we're getting down there. But just be consciously aware that you do not want to have air introduced at this point of the game. So if it's getting too low, stop what you're doing, adjust the cup accordingly. But we're looking pretty good at this stage. Looking pretty darn good. And I am going to adjust the cup just a little bit here. Being that we're on the tail end of the resin here. It won't soak up too much more resin. Once it starts hitting the end here, the peel ply, it'll go very, 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 very slowly. And we might be lucky if it saturates this vacuum manifold here. Sometimes you get that, sometimes you don't. But initially you'll have a lot of resin movement because the pressure differential from the atmosphere to your part cavity is very, very big. Once the resin gets closer and closer to the end there, there's less and less and less pressure differential, so the resin will move a lot slower. So keep that in mind on a bigger infusion. You got to plan your strategy account. Like I said, you might need to add multiple feed lines. It'll feed across, and add a second feed line, add a third feed line. This is looking pretty darn good though. It's looking really good. We're sitting at about 6 minutes for the infusion. And like I said, this resin system has an open life of about 45 minutes. So we've got plenty of time to go. Once we finish this little teeny tiny area here, I'll end up clamping the feed line off because we don't need to put any more resin into the system. It's already got plenty of resin. You can really, really see that it's creeping along at this stage. You see all those little air bubbles that are left over or getting taken care of. Looking pretty darn good. Pretty happy with the way this ran. You can see a little bit of a bleed going through the peel ply here into the vacuum manifold. But we're pretty much on the tail end of the infusion here. I'm pretty happy with the way that looks. Everything is nicely saturated. And at some point, the resin won't feed anymore because there's nowhere else for it to go. Unless you create a clear channel for the resin to actually go into the vacuum manifold and get pushed into the catch can, it'll kind of stop on its own. So some people will actually leave the hose in the resin cup and wait for the resin to go off. I'll clamp off the line. It's no big deal. Then I'll also drop the vacuum pressure because there's no point in having vacuum on it anymore. Again, all little tricks of the trade. Everybody's got their secrets, and these are a few of mine. We'll let that sit for just about another minute, and then we'll be set to rock and roll. Yep, really happy with that. So there's your resin infusion. Once this is all set to rock and roll, we'll pop this out tomorrow and see what kind of part we got. All right, we have a completed resin infusion. We are ready to debag this and see what we get. We're gonna start by ripping the bag itself off. Come on. There we go. Those go in the trash. You can see our vacuum manifold has just a little bit of resin bleed on it. That's completely perfect. So here's where hopefully it's a little bit easier than more difficult. This peel ply I said before is supposed to be a little bit easier to pop off than a non-treated peel ply. If you really want to babysit this, you can start to demold your peel ply actually before it fully cures. Makes it a little bit easier to take apart, but switch to a bigger wedge here. It's always fun with epoxy demolding parts. Getting close, we're getting close. All right, there we go. All right, moment of truth. This is what everybody's been waiting for. You guys all want to see if we win. Hopefully we get a good looking part here. This is gonna pop out fairly easily, I have a sneaky hunch. Just gonna kind of go around the perimeter a little bit, give it a little crack. That was really easy. All right. Moment of truth. You guys ready for this? Ooh, that is pretty. Check that out. Gonna get really up on that. Fresh out of the mold. That is a really good looking part. I think the customer is going to be fantastically excited about this. I know I am. Every single time I do this, I get a kick out of it. Every single time. This is a really, really, really good looking part. So now all that's left is to go around and trim it a little bit, drill a couple mounting holes, and we're ready to rock and roll. Thanks for following along. Thanks for watching the video. Like it if you can, share it if you can, sub it if you're not subbed, and you will see more of this down the road, and it only gets bigger and better from here. Catch you guys later.